You're listening to the No Gray Areas podcast with Patrick McCullough. Today's guest is Chris Hilken, speaker and pastor. Chris shares about his overwhelming journey and how he's struggled with the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Let's dive in.
Chris Hilken, welcome to the No Gray Areas podcast. So good to have you. We've known each other for a couple of years. We both spoke at some of the same churches. I've felt a connection, a kinship to you. You have a big family, right?
That's
How many
right.
kids?
5 kids.
5 kids, yep. And like many people, most of our listeners are actually just listening. They're not watching, so they wouldn't know this. But if they were watching, they'd probably look at you right now and say, how do you have 5 kids? You're like 24 years old.
Right.
Because you look really young, right?
Yeah.
You've heard that your whole life.
I get that a bit.
You're going to like that when you get to your 40s, though.
That's what people
I
keep telling
promise
me.
you. I promise
That's
you.
what they keep saying.
Yeah. But you, in this last year, you went through what someone might say like hell on earth, a really difficult time, right? So start to unpack that. I don't think many of our audience would know.
Yeah. So my wife and I were married for 8 years, and we were about to give birth to our 5th kid. And when I say we, I use that really loosely because she's giving birth and I'm watching. And
Yes.
so gave birth to our...
You learned a lot in those 8 years,
learned-
clearly. I see
learned a
that
lot.
because the way you just qualified that.
Yeah. And so it was like a home birth. It was cool. Everything was going great. And we were just kind of relishing. It felt like our family was complete. Felt like we finally had, after every kid, we kind of looked at each other, even in the hospital after birth, and just went like, I think we want one more. And so we finally felt like, wow, I really think this is content. I really feel like our family's complete with her. And we talked about doing adoption later on, but within about 48 hours after.
So you were going to add more kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it's a lot, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Never a dull moment. So 48 hours maybe afterwards, she started getting this like kind of strange back pain, and didn't think anything of it. And I'm thinking, well, you just gave birth in the corner of our bedroom in a hot tub, like maybe that's
That
why you
might
have
be the
some
back
pain,
pain.
you know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you strained something, you pulled a muscle, and so that was kind of consensus. Like you went online, you looked at all this stuff, and that was kind of what it was, and it started not going away. It just kept kind of lingering there, and so after quite a bit of time, I finally called my buddy who works at a hospital in the area, and I said, okay, this is what happened. Here's what's going on. And he said like this strangely harrowing phase where he said 99% chance it's a pulled muscle. You tweaked it. You slept on it weird. You pushed in a funny position that it might require some physical therapy or acupuncture, whatever, chiropractic care, whatever. He said, but there's 1% chance it's a pulmonary embolism. And so I'm, trying to act like I know. I'm like, so if I'm 5, explain a pulmonary embolism to me. And he said a lot of times with like pregnant women and women immediately after birth, they get these blood clots in their legs that end up traveling different places. And one of the places that it'll get lodged is your lungs. So you'll get a blood clot on your lungs. And he said 25% of people, their first symptom is death. So they don't even know. So it passes from their lung to their heart and it kills them instantly. And so unbeknownst to me, Paige had been following someone on Instagram. She was big on Instagram, and she did a lot of holistic health stuff. And she's an amazing entrepreneur and started a bunch of businesses. And but the Instagram account that she was following, this is a woman who, during her pregnancy with her 5th kid, had a pulmonary embolism and it killed her. And so this is all kind of fresh in Paige's mind.
Yeah.
And we go to
She just gave birth to her 5th kid.
Just gave birth to her 5th kid,
And she's
so
reading
she's
about people
watching,
dying of this.
She's watching the parallels happen. So we go to the hospital, and they do a scan and everything. They're like, you have a pulmonary embolism. And so you just kind of watch something click for her in her brain, something just kind of, and I really think it was, we had an amazing marriage. We had all 5 kids. We had our future in front of us. We were living out in a cool like farm town out in North County, San Diego, and everything was just lining up. And then I think she just watched. She was healthy, and she took care of her body, and she ate like all organic. You know what I mean? And then all of a sudden,
She's doing everything right.
Yeah. And then this thing snuck up on her, where it's like, wait, did you just tell me I almost died? And the fear of that set in so intensely for her that we spent a couple days in the hospital, and she was always naturopathic, like holistic stuff. And now she's like having to give herself shots so that she can, as like blood thinners, so she can try to keep nursing the baby, because the normal medicine doesn't allow you to nurse. So it's like her whole world kind of got thrown off. And we went home that night, and I don't know if it was that night or the next night, but She woke up in the middle of the night in like a panic. She thought that the blood clot had passed and it had hit her heart. So she felt some heart palpitations. And then so she woke me up and she like said her goodbyes. She's like, I'm not going to make it. She's like, let's get the kids up. And I'm like, whoa, and I can't overemphasize the intensity of that moment, but, so I'm trying to keep cool, right? I'm trying to be calm. And so I call the nurse hotline. I'm calling the emergency room and going like, hey, what's going on? And they're like, hey, I'm sure this is not what's happening. Like you're probably not super cognizant of it. She might have a cardiac infarcture, which is basically, a heart palpitation because part of your heart wasn't getting oxygenated blood for a season because your blood clot was stopping it. That's probably what it was. But when she had that freak out moment, her brain just kind of started connecting sleep with death. If I go to sleep, I'm not going to wake up again. And didn't think much of it, but the next time we got in bed and she just like stayed awake. So it's probably midnight at that point. She wakes me up. She's like, hey, Christopher, I just can't sleep.
And she's not consciously trying to stay awake.
No, she wants to sleep more than anything.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I'll stay up with you. And so it was midnight and we like put on some worship music. I got my guitar out. I'm just like going to play with her because she's just not even, doesn't even seem like she's tired. And, so that happens, and that's day after day, night after night after night after night. The same thing happens. And after day 2, I took her to the emergency room and just said, guys, something's going on. Like, she won't sleep. And I don't mean she sleeps a little bit. Like, everyone was like, I was like, my wife's not sleeping. And they're like, okay, so how many hours did she get? I'm like, no, I'm not mincing words. I think you heard me say she's not sleeping well, but I didn't. She's just not sleeping. She's got a newborn. She's breastfeeding. She's undernourished. She's all these things. And she doesn't sleep. And so it's like every day that we would go back and they would give us like the next bigger pill and the next bigger like intense thing to put her down and to like put her finally to sleep, and it just wasn't working. And so every night I would go to sleep at like 10 o'clock and we would try like different meditations and reading the Bible and doing else, and it just wasn't working. And I would fall asleep, and then sure enough, around midnight, 1 a.m., she would wake me up and go, hey, I can't sleep again. So I would stay up with her through the night. And then on day 4, she started talking about like, hey, I'm starting to have these weird like suicidal thoughts. And my wife is someone who, whenever we heard about someone committing suicide, she would just kind of break down to me like, how could anyone do this? Like, it's so selfish and it's so this and it's so that, and I don't understand it and I can't comprehend it. And like, if someone ever had anxiety around us or depression in our close circle, she was always very empathetic towards them, but then would come to me and go like, I don't get it. Like,
so she's never struggled up to this point. She didn't have a past struggling with anxiety or depression or nothing.
And her platform was fairly big on social media, and she was outspoken about her views, and so she had the stuff thrown at her too. Like, people would, she had moments where people would come at her, and it was like water off a duck's back. She just wasn't bothered by anything, didn't get wrapped up in anything, and was just phenomenally confident, and it helped so many women throughout her life. And so she just kind of knew who she was. She was so comfortable in her own skin. And so you just sit there and you're like, did you just say you're having suicidal ideation? Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I just went to use the restroom and I looked at like my cord to my hairdryer and thought I could use that. And she's like, I just can't shake this idea. And she was always very honest and open with it. Like, she never really hid anything. And so we went back to the emergency room the next day, walked him through that. They gave her the next biggest pill, nothing worked. Went back the next day, next biggest pill, nothing worked. And then I was going to teach at church that next night, and she came with me because I just felt like, at this point, I don't want to leave her alone or alone with the kids because she's not sleeping, and that can make you do weird stuff. Like, if you start Googling, what do you do after 3 days of no sleeping? Most of the things are jokes, and some of them are like, yeah, you're on like a binger, or you've got, you're cracked up on something. But when you start Googling, like, what happens after 5 days of no sleep, the articles go from like 2.5 million hits to like 13 hits, because it's just not something that happens. And for 10 days straight, she didn't sleep at all. Not one wink. And after whatever day it was, where I was at church, she ended up saying like, I don't feel safe if you go inside. And so I called like,
this is right before you're going up to speak.
Yeah. I'm like in the parking lot getting ready to go in. And it was always this ideation, like, they call it suicidal obsession sometimes, especially for people who go through something traumatic like that. She got diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And so I'm like, okay, she's having these ideations, but then she started saying, I don't feel safe. Like, I feel like I could act on this. And So I called everyone who's got any kind of psych in their name, psychiatrist, psychologist, psychological, whatever it was. And North Coast, this team from North Coast came around her and just kind of sat with her and sat with me. And I'm trying not to panic, but in my head, I'm going like, wait, what? Like, what are we talking about right now? Are we really having this conversation? And so we ended up taking her down to a behavioral health unit in San Diego that night. And she was there for, I think, 6 days or whatever it was. They finally gave her this crazy cocktail of sleep medicine, and she was able to sleep after like the first or second night, which equaled 10 days total. And then every day I would drive down. It's about an hour drive. I had someone watch the kids. I would drive down. I would get her Rubio's on the way there, and we would eat lunch together at the behavioral health unit. And it just felt so weird. It was like, why are we here? What are we doing here? Like, this is not for people like us.
Yeah.
You know, this is for people who, and a lot of them had different drug issues and whatever. And those diseases are very real too. Not trying to diminish them, but just to say like, everything that we've done in our life was to just protect these things, and to, you know, our marriage and our open lines of communication and our handling stress and our handling different arguments. Like, it was all to prevent this. And now we're sitting here. So she went through that process, ended up she got some brainwave therapy afterwards, and she just registered off the charts in terms of trauma. They basically said, like, it's like you're constantly in a war. So my wife's fight or flight reflex was constantly engaged. And so when you talked with her, it was like she wasn't really there when she was there. And long story short, there's a lot more elements to it.
Like how when you say that it was like fight or flight, because I think those terms are thrown around a lot nowadays.
Sure.
But hers was really serious. I mean, from not sleeping that much, right? Like, yeah.
She would explain to you how she would kill herself in any moment. But if you said, "Are you depressed?" she would go, "No." "Do you want to end your life?" "No."
Yeah.
Then why are you talking about this? And her brain had
confusing for her.
Oh my
you.
gosh, she was so confused.
Yeah.
Because it was like an impulse, and that's what afterwards I'm realizing, learning so much about the brain, that lack of sleep can rewire your brain to where its self-preservation instinct becomes like self-destruction instinct. And you're like, what in the world? So that's what she would do. She would sit there and she would laugh and she would play and she would talk about how much she loves her life, and she would write in her prayer journal and she would do all these things. And then she would sit there and go like, I can't drive today. I can't drive the kids anywhere. I can't do this kind of stuff. And so this behavior, that's like the fight or flight thing, was just constantly in that zone. And she was afraid of things. And when we talked about the future, she was like, I don't want to talk about the future right now. And so there's a lot of other stuff that happened, but basically the trauma just kept getting worse and worse. My son Leo went limp one day, just fell over and was unconscious. And they thought he took Paige's sleep medicine and he was going to die. So they basically said, if it's already said, and we were up at Hume Lake, and so we didn't have a way of getting down the hill.
That camp?
I'm speaking at Hume Lake. We didn't have a way of getting down the hill. You couldn't life flight. And so I had a guy tell me, like, if what happened is what we think happened, we can't save him. We can't pump his stomach. We can do all that stuff, but it's already setting in. He's limp. He's unresponsive. And after a few days of like, what the heck is going on, got diagnosed with acute onset cerebralitis, which is this just infinitesimally rare disease where a kid's whole nervous system shuts down because they're getting sick. And after 3 days, he was fine. And my daughter Finley, our newborn, had an asthma attack in the middle of the night, and we had to rush her to the emergency room. And it just felt
like getting hit over and over again with. Yeah.
It just felt like I remember my prayer being so poignant. That term was like, God, just leave me alone. Like, just leave me alone. Okay. Like and I'm thinking back to like heroes of faith, historically speaking, or even people that I like to, you read their books and they're theologians, and, you know, like you read A Grief Observed, and how come C.S. Lewis wrote it? Oh, because his wife died. And, you know, the guy who wrote It Is Well With My Soul, and he writes it when he's passing over his entombed child's grave in the Atlantic or whatever it is. And so I just started thinking to myself, like, is this what you're doing? Like, are you just trying to make an example out of me and my family? And like, because I'd rather just not be involved in ministry and you leave me alone than to give me some kind of testimony that you're going to want me to share later on. Like, just like legitimately, it was never abandoning him, but definitely wrestling of like, just leave us alone. Because it just felt gratuitous. And when anyone in our immediate community was just kind of like, this is a joke. Like, this is all a joke, you know? And I used to always tell people, like, you know, they couldn't find their keys. They're like, well, I'm getting Jobbed right now, you know, like this is like Job in the Bible. And that's kind of how it felt. It felt like everything that was sacred to us was getting kind of ripped away one by one.
Well, and in some ways it was, though, right?
Yeah.
Because not finding your keys is a lot different than what you were going through. You
Right.
literally were in the process of going through similar to what Job had to deal with.
Yeah, and my son was having like eye surgery. My other son named Brady, his eyes were turning inwards randomly. We thought he was crossing his eyes for fun, but turns out he had some kind of what they thought could be a growth in his brain and was doing that stuff. And I just stopped telling people this stuff because it just felt like a lie. It felt like there's no way you're going to believe that this is happening to me too. And so I ended up just hiding it, and everything else bad that would happen, I would just not even tell anyone because it was just so intense and it was so weird, and it was just. It felt like Satan was getting the win every time new people were freaking out or whatever. So anyway, her mental health continued to decline to a point where she just started participating in really strange behavior. Like I was standing next to her one day. She jumped off the balcony at our house. Like we're just standing, like holding each other, talking about the day. And she's like, I just feel like I want it. And then she just jumped off the balcony and she landed on the ground below. And fortunately she wasn't hurt by that. But like all my kids were around, and, my son's going like, to anyone who would come over, why is mom jumping off the balcony? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I would catch her like trying to put things around her neck and strangle herself. And it was just this duality. It was as close to what you would understand as like possession as you could possibly get, where it's like you're normal, we're talking, we're having conversations, we're doing this, and then you do this erratic behavior. And even psychiatrists are starting to scratch their head, like we don't really get what's going on.
And she's sleeping by now, but it's
she's
what they're
probably
assuming
sleeping
is
half
the
the
trauma.
time.
Okay, but the trauma has rewired her brain in some ways.
Right, she's just not herself anymore. And so that's probably started at the beginning of May, and so May through July, I would say she stopped being herself probably mid-April, I would say. And then it was kind of like there was this person, and she was almost like she was like a patient, and I was like a doctor. And so we're doing everything. I'm like EMDR, eye movement therapy, hypnosis, like no matter what, right? I mean,
anything.
Just try anything. And we're in a Christian counselor's like, can you hypnotize her? And like, I don't know, just get her to go to sleep and get, like, that was my thing. It's like almost through tears with each of them, like, I will pay you whatever, just give me my wife back, And so after the balcony incident, I finally I went on Google and I just said, I'm worried about local. I'm not worried about anything. And before that, she didn't want to leave the kids. She's like, whatever we do, I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving our kids. So if you want to do an outpatient thing, I'll go for a day. But after that episode,
there's 5 kids, like you said, and a newborn. One of them's a newborn.
Yeah. And she's kind of disassociated with the idea of her needing help or her going crazy. She doesn't connect with it. Because when she's healthy, it's like, oh, this is great. After that, she agreed to. She's like, I think I need something more intense. So I went online. I said, what's the best PTSD trauma center in the nation? Like, we don't care what it costs. I don't care if it's covered by insurance. Everyone's like, well, is it your insurance? I don't care. If it's the best one at this point, like I'll sell my kidney, like I'll sell my plasma. If we're all naked on the side of a road and we have no house or no clothes left, let's do it. Because I just need to get I just gotta get my wife back. Like it's like the parable of like the pearl in the field, right? The treasure in the field. It's like, now that I know that this could be taken from me, like just sell everything and get her back. So Tucson, Arizona had one that was nationally renowned. And so she ended up going to that center. And again, after a couple of days, she was able to convince them to let her out of like the intense check-in every 30 minutes thing. And she went into residential side, and within 48 hours, she had taken her own life. And so July 31st at 10 a.m., I'm sitting in the living room with my kids, and my parents were in town randomly, and I get a call from the place, from Tucson, and I think it's Paige. It's like our daily check-in. The day before, we talked about Costco. I took all 5 kids to Costco, and it was just a great spectacle, and I took a picture of them, and couldn't send it to her because she didn't have her phone with her, but I'm talking to her about, I'm just going like, hey, I appreciate so much more than I ever did, because this is hard, and it's not just hard, it's taxing, and it's emotional, and like, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing weird in that conversation. And then at 10 a.m., this 3 people on this phone at the same time. I answer the phone, hey babe, what's up? And it's, hey, this is Dr. whomever from.
No, they called on her phone.
No, they called on. She wasn't allowed to use her phone, so they called on the phone the phone, the area code that I was expecting, because
it was her,
this is what she did every day.
Yeah.
We talked every day, and there's 3 people, and I'm like, oh, this isn't good, like. But I'm thinking to myself, like, every time she's had any kind of attempt, it was always more of a, jumping off the balcony, like that wouldn't kill you, or, she would move towards me when she felt like she was going to do something impulsive, and she would like let me know about it, and I would protect her from it. And so the doctor said, Mr. Hilken, this morning your wife attempted suicide. And he paused, and I was like, and I'm thinking like, is she kicked out of the program? Like, what do you mean she attempted suicide? And then he said, and she was successful. And I remember thinking that even at the moment, like, first of all, you need to get a new way of saying that. And secondly, like, your world, if you think of like a war movie where a bomb goes off next to the guy, and you just hear this like ringing in your ears, and then English language, so I know what you just told me. But like, there's no way that you just told me what you just told me. Like,
yeah.
And so I remember just collapsing like a little puddle on the floor, and then it was almost like adrenaline kicked in, and it was like dad mode. Like, I got to go tell 5 babies that they're never going to see their mom. You know what I mean? Like, there's just, you can go to seminary, you can go to Bible college, but nothing prepares you for that moment where you got to be like, so I remember going downstairs, and I sent the kids upstairs first to tell my parents were there, and my brother and his wife was there. Again, as an act of God. They lived in Bakersfield. They shouldn't have been there. They were dropping off my dog, who ended up whatever. But I just remember, I like was staring around the room. I just said, like, she's dead. And my dad, what? Who? What? And I was like, Paige is dead. And everyone just collapsed. It was just like, because the ramifications it sets in one by one, and almost like 1,000 paper cuts, you start thinking of the implications of this, and not the least of which is like, there's my lover, there's my wife, there's my everything, there's my future, there's my passion, there's my plan, there's like, she is my everything, and you just told me she's gone. And I do not know how. There aren't words that I know how to say to help articulate what it feels like to have your soul get stepped on like that. And so I told everyone, I was like, hey, you got to be strong. We got to tell these kids, and this is the worst day of their life. They don't even know it yet. But I don't want to add fear in the mix, because you guys are rolling around on the ground and freaking out. Like, let's get it together and let's be there for them. There's gonna be a lot of time today for us to weep with each other and to fold and to do that. But right now, let's get these kids told, because nothing's gonna make sense until they understand what happened. And so I just explained it to them. And I remember thinking to myself, whether it was right or wrong, like, don't have to tell them twice. So tell them exactly what happened. So.
And how old are they? How old is your oldest?
The oldest is 7.
Okay.
And then 5, 4, 2, and newborn. So not concerned about newborn, right? Not concerned about 2-year-old, really. Yeah. Middle child, Brady, maybe not, don't know. But the older 2 is like, this is his mom, like this is. So, yeah. So I just told him my dad had cancer a few years back, and my best friend was killed in Afghanistan back in 2017. And so we've been talking about death. We've been talking about his cancer. We've been talking about my buddy Tito, who was killed. And so their vocabulary was strong enough that they could get both of those concepts. And so I said, you guys know how Pop-Up, that's what we call my dad. Pop-Up had cancer, and it threatened to kill his body. Mom had a kind of a cancer too of her brain. And when this cancer gets really bad, it tells you to do stuff that you would never do. And because you're so sick that you start listening to it. And Mommy had a kind of almost like a cancer of the brain that told her that the best thing that she should do right now is to kill herself. And that's what happened. Mommy's disease got so bad that it's like someone else took over her body and took her life from her. Because your mommy. Your mommy would never do that. Your mommy loves you so much. You do. And you just start watching their cogs turning, like, because they're starting to get the implications of what's going on, and they get enough that they're like, wait, so, my middle son's like, so hold on, she's dead, but when is she coming back from the hospital? And, to your worst enemy, you would never want them to have that conversation. It was just like the most painstaking, and that just led to like that was the beginning of just the season of, the dark night of the soul, where you go, how in the world, why, who are you, God? Like, why, how did you? And from that to planning her memorial, to then picking up the pieces of your life to go, now what? Like, and in your moments, it's like it hits you in waves. Your wave at one point in that day was like, wait, does that mean I gotta date people again? Like, what did I just become, like the single father of 5? Like what is? And then you start thinking about your future and all the promises that you made about what you were gonna do, and then reflect back on your wedding, and our wedding song was "I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough," and you're like. You think about your vows, and for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. And it's just.
Yeah.
So that just kind of began that season for me that I'm in, right now, of deep refining, deep grief, intense suffering. But also, I think in the middle of that, in God's faithfulness, I've found the different attributes of God that have always escaped me are now so much more real to me than ever before. Like God as comforter. And what did that mean? Well, who needs a comforter when you've never been uncomfortable? God as provider. Like who needs a provider when you've always had providence? And and that's been this season for me, is just this deep, passionate relationship with Jesus that I've never had before, on the coattails of the most intense tragedy I could possibly imagine, and just taking every day one at a time, and trying to raise these kids to know Jesus, and doing whatever I can to try to be both mom and dad to them. And so that's my story.
Man, Chris, I run a podcast, so I have to talk. But I think when anybody goes through something like you've gone through, I've heard it said before, you just show up and shut up sometimes, because what do you say? It's a little bit like what I feel like right now. Like I don't even know what to say. But I certainly, hearing you describe that, grief and confusion go well together, don't they? Like that. What I kept hearing you saying, you're confusing. You're confused. Like there's all these different thoughts. You're thinking wedding day and future, and how do you tell your kids? And so you're going through that, and your kids are going through that. And I imagine in the last, it's not even been a year now, right? It's like 7-8 months now. You've had to do many times what you did first moments, where you had to set aside what you were dealing with to deal with your kids. But then you have to deal with your stuff too. Otherwise, you're going to be in a really unhealthy place. So I can't even imagine the weight. And
Hey, we recognize that this is a really deep subject, difficult subject. We're talking about grief. We're talking about suicide. So first of all, we just want you to know that if you're struggling with this, or you know someone who is, we have information in the description about a suicide hotline that you can reach out to. But because of the fact that this is such a deep subject, we're going to split this into 2 parts. So make sure and join us again next week as Chris Hilken continues to unpack his journey and how we can deal with our own grief and help deal with the grief of others.